guys, and welcome to Cal's Gone Bush, the podcast where I'm bringing you the craziest stories, characters and places from down under. Since it's October and you can't walk down the street without tripping over Halloween decorations, I decided to bring you a spooky story. Well, kind of spooky. I'll read the TripAdvisor reviews later so we can figure out just how spooky it is, but for now I won't break the magic of the whole story. So, I am going to tell you a bit about the Monte Cristo Homestead, which is located in Junee in New South Wales. Over 100 years ago, there wasn't much to the town of Junee, but that all changed when a bloke by the name of Christopher William Crawley acquired a couple of blocks of land in town. At this point, he was just a poor, struggling farmer, but his luck all changed when in 1978, the Great Southern Railway was built. Mr. Crawley saw this as a great opportunity and he acquired a license and built the railway hotel opposite the railway station. This proved to be a very wise decision, and within a few years he practically owned Junee. Because of this, he decided he needed a nice, beautiful, huge, massive fuck-off house to go with his new status as being the pillar of the community. So he built the Monte Cristo household right on top of a hill overlooking his kingdom of Junee. Together with his wife, Elizabeth Crawley, they hosted parties and social gatherings, and it appeared to be quite the happy household. But we all know appearances aren't all that they seem. Although the pair were devout Catholics and donated money to the community and the church, at home Mr. Crawley was having a lot of fun, but not with his wife. He was rumoured to have impregnated a couple of maids, one of which jumped off the balcony of the second story, and apparently to this day you can still see the bloodstain of where she landed. Another maid did actually give birth to the suspected child of Mr. Crawley, but the child was severely mentally disabled and ended up being chained out the back to the stables, where apparently the townsfolk could hear him crying and moaning. Back in those days, they seemed to think that people that were born with mental disabilities were possessed, or they just treated them horribly. So, it's no wonder that this homestead ended up being supposedly haunted with all of the shit that went down. I mean, you've got a maid that's throwing herself off the balcony. The wife probably isn't happy at all. And then, you've got another maid that gave birth to a, mentally disabled child, and instead of giving him proper care, just chain him up outside in the stables. He'll be right. Don't worry about him. And so quite a crazy, weird, scary household at this point. The couple had several children, the youngest of which was apparently Mrs. Crawley's favourite and the apple of her eye. But Mrs. Crawley was known to be quite a cruel and nasty woman and ruled her household with an iron fist. The staff pretty much terrified of her, but also probably a little bit resentful because they didn't have any power back then. I mean, it's not like they could complain to her manager. So when one of the housekeepers was in charge of looking after the youngest child of Mrs. Crawley's and accidentally fell down the stairs, no one was quite sure whether or not that was actually an accident. There's a few different versions of that. One is that she was pushed by something she couldn't see. Another one was that she tripped. And the other one is that she purposely fell down the stairs with the baby because she was just trying to get back at Mrs. Crawley for being such a horrible woman, I'm guessing. No one will ever know that. However, the staircase is apparently haunted, and children especially seem to have a hard time on that staircase. Another tragedy that happened while the Crawleys were in residence was the death of a stable boy who died in a fire that was lit apparently by his boss. When he called in sick for work, his boss was trying to see if he really was sick, so he lit the room that the boy was staying in on fire. And obviously the boy really was telling the truth because he couldn't make it out in time. And sadly, he died in the fire and is said to remain on the property to this day. Christopher Crawley died in 1910, leaving Elizabeth Crawley to live in the house alone with all the help that she clearly didn't like. She stayed in that house for another 23 years and only ventured out twice to go to town. She even had a chapel built in the house, she converted one of the rooms in the house into a chapel so she didn't have to go into town to go to church. Elizabeth Crawley died in 1933 of a burst appendix. In 1948, the last of the Crawley family vacated the house and it remained empty until 1963 when it was bought by the Ryans for £1,000 from the Crawley family. This sounds like a bargain, but the place was a fucking shithole when they bought it. Because it had sat vacant for so long, it had fallen victim to looters and squatters and just general vandalism. So the Ryans had a fair bit of work to do. And one of the biggest things was the place had no electricity. So it was a bit odd when one night they came home from town and it was quite late at night and obviously pitch black, and the entire house was lit up like a fucking Christmas tree. At first, Mr. Ryan thought maybe the vandals were back. So he told everyone to wait in the car and he approached the house. But as soon as he got to the door, all of the lights went out. After this incident, more weird shit started happening around the property. Mr. and Mrs. Ryan started hearing footsteps of a woman in heels in the veranda above them on the second story, which was full of holes at the time and unusable, so it couldn't have been anybody in the family. They experienced items being moved around, strange noises, chills, and plenty of creepy and unexplained sensations. One of the kids, Lawrence Ryan, who actually now runs the joint, recalls an absolutely terrifying experience from when he was a kid. He said that his parents were hosting a party at the time, and as he was only little, one of his sisters took him up to bed. Every hour, one of them would pop their head in to check on him. His youngest sister, who was 12 at the time, entered his room to see a bearded man sitting on the end of his bed staring at him. He then turned to give her a menacing stare. She screamed and ran to the party to tell her parents that there was a weird man in his room. But when they got up there, he was gone and I was still sound asleep. They searched the house and found nothing or no one. She described him as wearing old-fashioned clothes and they thought it was possibly Mr. Crawley, who had been seen on the property a number of times since. Lawrence said he didn't hear that story until he was actually 13 years old and his sister told him what happened. He said it all made sense because he hated that room and he always felt like he was being watched. He said he never slept in the main house again and he still won't, although he runs tours where you can sleep in the main house at your own risk. According to Lawrence, although Mr. Crawley is seen occasionally, it's mainly Mrs. Crawley who is most often seen and has been heard to tell visitors to get out. I guess this makes sense because she didn't leave the house for a good 23 years after her husband died, and she would be pretty attached to that place and still think it's her house. So she's not real happy about visitors being in there, especially if she doesn't like them or the way they act or the way they talk about her house. So if you are going to go to Monte Cristo in Junee, just be on your best behaviour because Mrs. Crawley could be watching and she's not a very nice ghost. Lawrence also goes into the child ghost on the stairs. That was, as I said, Mrs. Crawley's favourite child, her youngest, who I've just seen, her name was Magdalene. And according to Lawrence, she was 18 months old at the time of her death. And he also confirms the rumours that she may have been pushed by a disgruntled servant, or so I actually got it wrong before. The servant didn't fall down the stairs with the baby fell down the stairs in the care of the servant. And apparently now that part of the house is very haunted, and as I said before, children get really funny in that area. It gives you an overwhelming sense of sadness, and Lawrence reckons he's seen grown men come crying out of that area of the house. Another strange thing that kind of happened to the Ryans was the animal situation. They say animals are quite sensitive to ghosts and spirits and things that aren't of this world, and this seemed to be true with the Ryans' cat and dog. They wouldn't enter the Monte Cristo Homestead or the main building. They would just run away. They also found their chickens strangled in their secure pens. A parrot choked to death in its locked cage, and kittens were found dead and mutilated in their breakfast room, which is just off the kitchen. I guess it's fair to say the place gives off a pretty evil vibe. But if you are going to stay there, I'll give you a rundown of some of the ghosts you may encounter. I have touched on a couple of them briefly, but this gives you a little bit more info. So first of all, we've got Mrs. Crawley, which is no surprise. Despite being a devout Catholic in life, her spirit is rumoured to be quite cruel and unkind in nature. Because she is so attached to the house, her presence is very, very strong. And it's not that unusual to actually see and feel her presence. She is usually seen dressed in black and carrying a silver cross. If you do upset her, which is easily done, she's pretty picky and she doesn't like people being in her house, she will probably just give you a bit of a shove or just basically make you feel horrible, just give you a really horrible feeling. So if you're going to go there, just try and be on your best behaviour, as I said before, and she'll hopefully leave you alone. Next up, Mr. Crawley. He's also felt in the building, but his presence isn't really as formidable as his wife, and he's usually only seen in the room in which he died. Morris the stable boy. So Morris was the guy I was talking about before that called in sick to work. So like I said, he was in bed and he was too ill to get up. And what happened next was two different versions. The first version describes Morris trapped in his bed, unable to move when a fire broke out in the stable. In the second version, which was a little bit more sinister, Morris's boss set fire to the straw mattress on which the poor boy was sleeping. Presumably, he was calling the boy's bluff and expected him to leap from the burning bed. Sadly, Morris died, and his screams are said to resonate around the stables to this day. Harold Steele was the rumoured illegitimate son of Mr. Crawley and one of the maids of the house. Now, there's a couple of reports. First, he was born mentally disabled, and another report is that as a youngster, he was in a carriage accident and sustained serious head injuries. He was, by all accounts, very aggressive and had a violent personality. And to control him, his mother chained him up at the stables behind the main house. He is said to have spent up to 30 years in this state, and as I said before, he would howl and scream and become a bit of a legend to the children of the town, and as you know, children can be very cruel. So they weren't very nice to him either. When his mother died, life became worse for Harold. Eventually, local people intervened and he was confined to a mental institution where he died soon after. Harold's howls and screams can still be heard from the property. The pregnant maid that committed suicide or was pushed off the balcony was apparently pregnant to Mr. Crawley, as I mentioned earlier in the episode. She apparently threw herself from the top of the veranda, although I suspect that she could have been pushed by Mrs. Crawley, who wouldn't have been happy about the situation, but hey, I don't have any proof. It happened 150 years ago. But at the time, there are a few rumours going around, so you never know, and I guess we never will. Whatever the case, she's clearly not at rest because her ghostly image is still said to be seen hovering around the exterior of the building. Lastly, we have Jack Simpson. Before the Ryans bought and restored the property, it was a bit of a crumbling mess on the top of the hill and became the classic haunted house on the top of the hill. This didn't bother Jack though, and he was one of the many caretakers who occupied the property after the last of the Crawley family left the building. One evening in 1961, he opened the door to an unexpected and lethal visitor. Shot at point-blank range, Jack died immediately. His murderer was a crazed local youth who had watched Psycho 3 times before carrying out the killing. Before fleeing the scene, the young man wrote, "Die Jack, ha ha," on a shed door. The words can clearly be read today, and the spirit of poor Jack is said to linger in the area. So there you have it, the legends and ghosts of the Monte Cristo Homestead. But what does the general public think? I wanted to know, so I went where I always go when I want to find a good review, or a bad one, or a medium one. TripAdvisor. Yep, you can now review your favourite haunted house on TripAdvisor, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, so the general consensus is that it is pretty fucking creepy out there. There are a couple of people that said that they had an experience. A lot of people said they felt uneasy or not very well. Some people said headaches. Some people said it was a load of shit and that they didn't feel or see anything. I think it really depends whether you believe in ghosts or not. If you go in there and, you know, you're really wanting to see something and you really believe that there's stuff there, you probably will hear or feel something, or, you know, but if you're not a believer, then I don't think you're going to see shit, really. There are a few Karens in there that said, oh my God, it was just so dusty and everything's just so old and just so shabby and they need to give it a good clean and a good air out and blah, blah. And I'm like, what's the point of having a house that's been like remodeled and the whole point of the dust and the cobwebs and the clutter is to make it look scary and haunted. That's why they've got all that old furniture in there. One person complains about the dip that the bed had in it. You're sleeping in these original beds that are like fucking 150 years old. What do you want? Anyway, okay, that's just me having a whinge about people having a whinge. I would definitely check it out. I said to my partner last night, I'd love to go and just do a dinner tour. I don't really want to stay there because I don't want to get up in the middle of the night and need to go to the toilet. I live in an old house as it is, and it's not a creepy old house, but when I have to get up and go to the toilet, I like run back to my bedroom. Like as if it can't get me if I quickly shut the door. And I'm 37 years old. I know, right? Like, it's fucking pathetic. But yeah, so if you like me and you get spooked easily, you'll probably love it. If you don't believe, don't bother. Like, unless you're just into history and old houses, and then you will appreciate it because the history is pretty interesting, as I've covered a bit of it. But also, it's just full of antique furniture and it's really cool. I think it's a bit cluttered, but hey, back in those days it was pretty cold, so they'd probably stuff in their fucking rooms full of furniture to keep warm. But it's a beautiful old house and a beautiful old homestead. So yeah, even if you don't believe in the ghost shit, definitely check it out. Junee's in the middle of fucking nowhere in New South Wales, between Albury and Wagga, I'm pretty sure. I haven't been there. I've driven through there and past there, but I've never actually been there. But I've always wanted to go to this place. I've just never seemed to have got around to it. Maybe now that COVID's limited me to travelling in New South Wales, I might start checking out my own backyard. Who fucking knows? Anywho, so yeah, that was basically my take on Monte Cristo. I'm so sorry if it's been a little bit all over the shop. I have been battling my crazy parrot, and no shit, this episode's gone for 19 minutes, and I've been recording for about 2.5 hours now because every time I speak, this psycho galah has just been squawking over the top of me, and I'm just, losing my notes and losing my mind and about to let him go. I'm thinking of just opening the back door and seeing what happens. Or maybe I just need to go and have a beer or something and calm down. I don't know. But yeah, it might not have been the most frightening episode, but it's definitely, I think, the subject of the Monte Cristo Homestead and all of its history and all of the stories are quite interesting. And yeah, as I said, check it out for yourself. Don't go off the TripAdvisor reviews, especially not the Karens that say it's too dusty, because I don't know what they were expecting. But yeah, dust is definitely going to be part of an old haunted house. Like, what do you want? I didn't go right into the history of the house because it's quite detailed and a lot of it didn't really have anything to do with the hauntings. But I will link the Monte Cristo website below so that you can have a look at the history if you want, and just where it is and how to get there and the contact details and how to book. So that will be in the episode notes. And that pretty much wraps up today's episode. And yeah, thanks for sticking with me because it's been quite frustrating to record with old mate Jackie boy in the background. I swear to God, at one point I'm just yelling at him, if you don't shut up, it's going to be galah pie for dinner. Actually, it's really funny because I have come in, and when I let him out of his cage, he likes to go and sit on the stove. So you don't fucking understand how close you are. But yeah, Anyway, I'll be back next week with another crazy Australian story. Until then, if you want to hit me up on social media, it's just Kel's Gone Bush on everything: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and I've got the Facebook group. If you do want me to cover anything in particular, I'm always open to a story that you guys want me to tell, and any feedback, although don't be too hard on me for this one, because this one was, as I said, I was battling that. Have you heard them squawk? It's like the most ear-piercing thing ever. I need to go and take like 2 Panadols and have a fucking 6-pack after this. Okay, I'm going to stop rambling and leave you right there. But yeah, as I said, feel free to hit me up. I'm always happy to hear your feedback, hear your suggestions, or just chat in general. I was actually, quickly, just before I go, I was on the Aaron White show. He's got a podcast and it's on YouTube, so you can have a look at that, where we did a Zoom thing, and it was my first Zoom ever, and yeah, I don't think I did too badly. So check that out. That's all about my skimpy days and just living in Darwin and in the bush and sort of all of that sort of jazz. And I think he's also on Spotify, Apple, and all of the places. And he's also on Instagram. I think it's Aaron White Author. He's also got some books out. He wrote a book about his FIFO life, which I haven't read it yet. He's sending it to me, but it looks really interesting and is a little bit like Paul Carter. Don't tell Mum I work on the oil rigs and that sort of stuff. So yeah, check him out if you like. I'm on his latest podcast, or the one from last Friday, and yeah, you can hear me waffle on about me, myself, and I. But yeah, that's it for today, guys. I'll be back next week, and until then, Kel has gone